Welcome. I'm going to wait a few minutes and see if anyone comes in for the live reading of well, I guess I don't know what chapter it is. It's page 73, starting with technique training. Unfortunately, I didn't plan this out very well, so I could have the book on the screen, but I'm just going to read it from the book that I have. If you don't have a copy, I can get you a copy right now. Right now, I'm offering it via email for a donation. I can send you the book. It's almost the only way you're going to get it. There's no ebook format, and it's worth it. Any donation you want. I already had someone. I sent them the book and haven't received any donations. So I might have to wait for donations before I send the book out next time. I tried to be a nice guy, but it's only been a couple of days, so you never know. Reading from this book here, The Greatest Tennis Book Ever, Advanced Techniques for Competitive Tennis. I don't believe this has ever been done before, and there's probably a good reason for it. One, it's difficult to understand. So that alone is going to knock out, 70%, at least 50% of the people that are interested in tennis, even coaching. There's no visible stimulus video. There's nothing for them to see. You think, the first time I heard this, I was on a trip. I was on a tennis trip with my buddy Lee Johnson, and he said to me, Lee was an interesting guy. I didn't quite understand the things that he was into back then. I do now. He was like probably 20 at the time. I was in my late 20s, and he said that tennis should be taught in a classroom, and I laughed at him. We just got back from this tennis event in Philadelphia on these really nice clay courts, and it was like one of those pro-ams. And yeah, he said tennis should be taught in a classroom, and I laughed at him. I kind of got what he was saying, but he's not 100% wrong. I do think tennis should be taught on the court, but the coaches and the teachers need to be in a classroom. The classroom can be on the court as well, but this stuff needs to be read and understood for most people. So I'm reading this chapter here is going to talk about introduce some things that I've already talked about and some things that I haven't talked about. So let's get into it. I don't know how far I'm going to go. I'll probably do a part 2 and part 3. I do have a video. Before I get started, I do have a video on part of this called What is Technique? So check that out. And I still am offering my tennis library. It's halfway done. 500 gigabytes of tennis videos, conference videos, tennis books. This book is in there. Will be available for a donation, 500 gigabytes. So if you're interested in that, send me an email. Technique training, development of tennis technique, systematization of technique development. The tennis player as a biopsychosocial unit. I think that stands for biological, psychological, and social unit. Neither good individual knowledge of technique nor the best biomechanical analysis and foundations of a movement sequence lead automatically to a theoretical and practical understanding of how the player learns technical skills in the most economical and fastest way, and especially how he learns to transfer these acquired skills as a whole to sporting performance. Wow, he said a lot there. So I'm going to try to break some of this down. This isn't going to be just like an audio book. So if we have anyone in the chat, or if you're watching this later on, you can leave comments. I'll try to respond. But really, what he's talking about here is because a lot of what this book is looking at is how do we develop technique? How do we help players develop technique in the most economical and fastest way? Pretty much so they can get on their way and start playing and competing and performing well as soon as possible. Because, and it's interesting reading this, looking at the most economical and fastest way. Long term, I do think if you play a lot of tennis matches, or if most people play a lot of tennis matches at their level, year round for many years, and then slowly increase their level, they will learn. Tennis technique well over a long period, for sure. And here it says neither good individual knowledge of technique nor the best biomechanical analysis and foundations of a movement sequence lead automatically to a theoretical and practical understanding of how the player learns. So you see all these videos, all these people that know the biomechanical aspects of it. You may even watch those videos and try to learn for yourself, and you might not even know the best way to learn for you. And a person might think that it's like, even me, I'm talking about the books and the tennis library, and the kid Lee talking about learning in a classroom. No, you're never gonna know. Like, knowing all this stuff doesn't ensure that you can transfer it to a person, to a learner. On the other hand, it is hardly possible to carry out a successful modern training program without excellent theoretical basic knowledge. So he's saying, on the other hand, you have to have that knowledge, or you should have good biomechanical analysis and understand the foundations of a movement sequence, understand knowledge of technique, etc. You should have that, even if knowing that isn't going to ensure that the player is going to understand, or you're able to transfer those skills to the player. It should not be forgotten that tennis technique can only be optimally developed when it is understood as part of a complete system. This means, however, that in every phase and at every step of development, the complete system must be developed, not only the technique. The complete system. It is current practice to make technique training mainly separate. By this, it means that but not only in the beginning, the coordination, conditioning, and tactical areas are developed either insufficiently or not at all. And if they are, then there is no connection and integration with the technique learning process. Now here, I think what he's referring to is, this is where the club comes in, how important a tennis club is, because the tennis club can take care of the social. And we're talking about tactical strategy. And clubs, what they try to do, we do have tennis clubs, but what they try to do is they try to separate technical from the group lesson, from tactical, and all the things you learn in a group. So you have your group, and then you have your private lessons. That is what he's saying is not, that's the current practice, and that's separate. That's not together. That's violating this principle, this tennis player as a biopsychosocial unit. It's violating that principle. And this is the current practice. So we have the club, but it's set up. In many places, it's set up incorrectly. Now, I remember when I first started coaching and I introduced the green ball to a guy and his kid, I had a group lesson with a few athletic kids, somewhat athletic kids, and I was super excited. And then we had one guy come from a little bit out of the area, and he was amazing. He was working with the best player in the area, and actually I'm doing the videos on the Metzger. He actually won the Metzger. His coach won the Metzger many years ago. And I met this guy a couple times. He's really, really cool guy, great player, great guy. And he was taking lessons from him. And I was trying to convince, he saw me do the lesson. And I was trying to convince him that it was, okay for him to come and use the green ball. And he was not buying it. He said, "Oh, we learn," and he would see me do lessons. He said, "Oh, my coach is focusing on, or my kid's coach is focusing on technique first, because the kid was like 10 years old. He's focusing on technique first, and he's learning tactics later." And I was doing it all at the same time. By this, it means that particularly, but not only in the beginning, the coordination, conditioning, and tactical areas are developed either insufficiently or not at all. See, this kid was getting no tactical training at all. Essentially, he was learning maybe some from the group lesson, but other than the group lesson he was in, I'm not sure where else he would have got it, other than playing matches. So he wasn't getting coaching. You see this. See, the way that I also read this is to get this type of training is you have two players playing against each other. And you can have four people in a group, but the lesson, everything is learned within that pair between the two, or developed between the two. And what's interesting when you do this, you can actually, I know I'm kind of being long-winded and not reading the book, but as much, but because I just have so much to offer. Because, like I said, I've done this, I've experimented with this. When you have a group of four, this is where 4 people or 3 people can be ideal, rather than just 2 people on a court. Because this is often a popular practice to do semi-private, where you have 2 players. But when you have 3, 4, or 5, you can have them doing coordination exercises on the side while the 2 players are playing the game and being coached, while the other players are out resting. Or you could have 1 player rest, 1 player is doing a speed exercise or a coordination exercise, and then they all rotate. And that is also what I think he's talking about here. Is right away you're integrating the speed and the coordination that the player is learning. You're integrating it into the game immediately. You're not going to the gym doing some strength exercises for the sake of getting stronger, or speed exercises or footwork exercises. And then you step off the court or out of the gym and okay, I did my footwork exercises today. No, you do your footwork and your speed and your coordination, your strength right there on the court, is particularly for developing juniors or for developing players. Not specifically, this isn't specifically for someone who's been playing, is already developed. You do it right there on the court, so it gets integrated immediately into the game. And we're going to get into why that's important. Technique learning and technique training must from the beginning be characterized by considerable variety and high complexity. This is another reason why it's good to have a process like that, because there's a lot of variety and it's very complex. In the tennis training methodology, well, I want to go back to that. Technique learning and technique training must, from the beginning, be characterized by considerable variety and high complexity. It's like chaos. Chaos in the beginning, you start with chaos, even though it may look like chaos, and then it slowly gets refined to what you see as the finished product. So play is chaos. And this is something that I learned when teaching children, learning about the benefits of free play. Because kids don't get free. They don't do the free. People, parents, coaches mess up the free play. I had free play when I was a kid because I played outside and I didn't have a coach. I did what I wanted. Not everyone has that experience. Considerable variety and high complexity. See, if you're competing and you're playing like mini tennis, you're getting variety, you're getting complexity. In the tennis training methodology, there are still 3 main weak points. They are the systematization of the whole development and training process. So the systematized training process that we currently have in most places is a weak point. And that's still true today. This book was written in 1998, 1999. This is still true today. The direct connection between technique, tactics, and conditioning training, absolutely still a weak point. The low distribution of technique training. See, what we want to do today is, oh, those kids are athletic. Those kids don't need the tactics. They don't need the conditioning because they play other sports. I had a kid who was probably one of the best players around here. Started with me, was 7 years old. By the time he was 14, he was amazing. It was I have a short of him serving. And he went through my system. And then, of course, at 13 or 14, I was kind of getting out of tennis, but he started getting coaching from other people. But the point I wanted to make about him was his dad had him. He played on the high school basketball team. He played baseball. And his dad had him coming to tennis lessons after serious basketball practice. So it's like, that kid doesn't need the conditioning. He probably doesn't need the tactics. He gets that from other sports. He understands the things like that. But we're not talking about, and this is the mistake tennis makes. He's good. He's a good player because he's got the inborn skills or he plays other sports. The low distribution of technique training. The load, I've seen this, it's too much for young kids. It's too much, and then they all got to keep up with each other, or they feel like they got to keep up with each other. It's like keeping up with keeping up with the Joneses. It must be understood that formation and training in sport must be considered as a unity of coordination, conditioning, technique, tactics, mentality, and social environment. So here, really kind of repeating himself. We're going to get into, I showed this in another video. He's a lot of this, what he's saying is talking about this bridge and how it should be developed together so that you don't have the broken bridge at any given time. You're consistently building up the bridge together. This does not mean, however, that all these areas should be worked on only in parallel or consecutively during training. Rather, that they must be really combined. So that's what he's talking about. They need to be combined, not we're working on this today, and then next session we're going to work on tactics. We're working on technique today, and then next session we're going to work on tactics. And then we're going to go to the gym and work on conditioning. No, all is being worked on together. For the development of each single part positively influences the development of all others, and conversely, a weak point in one area automatically hinders optimal development in the other areas. Here, coordination is the key. Excellent coordination ability and coordination speed are not only the most important basic factors in the learning of technique, but rather they serve as a transfer and connecting bridge between the two pillars of conditioning and technique. In technique, the conditioning area can only be optimally transmitted by coordination ability. So show that again. The coordination area is lacking, the bridge is fragile, the connection is disturbed or non-existent, and therefore even an excellent level of conditioning cannot support and positively affect the formation of technique or, above all, the situational use of technique. In particular, all types of strength and speed can only be integrated into the technique by means of coordination, especially where there is a high movement dynamic, mainly where balance is concerned, or at high speeds. So you could think of like a soccer player. A lot of times, like soccer players will come in, they have the conditioning, they have the speed, but they don't have the tennis coordination. Specifically, the high speed and the tennis-specific coordination. That's what they're integrating. They're integrating to the skills that they already have. On the other hand, inadequate conditioning and training, as in a match, has a negative effect on the formation of technique and its application. A lack of strength, speed, or endurance limits the individual learning and performance ability. The existing technical skills cannot be effectively put into practice either. All people, tennis players included, must always be considered a biopsychosocial unit. Now, something I want to point out that's interesting. There's going to be so many good stuff in this for like serious learners. I had this kid, literally a couple lessons. He was like 8 years old. Normal kid, maybe a little bit big, but 8 years old. I was playing, we were doing mini tennis foam ball. And when I used the foam ball and I got him to rally, the technique that you see, like, just the typical technique you would see, like the USTA teaches, the racket head above the handle, and then the racket goes down and goes through the ball, through the contact zone, and then finish across the body, over the shoulder, whatever. That whole thing that they teach, that the USTA literally still teaches for their red ball players to learn. This kid did it. He wasn't athletic. This kid's not athletic. He just went through the rally process. The speed was right. The court size was right. And he was doing this naturally. I didn't say a word. I didn't say a fucking word to him. Now, he lacked strength. He lacked conditioning. He lacked certain speed. He could never do this on an orange court. It would break down. With a red ball, it would break down. It was only the foam ball that he could do this, that this happened. And to me, this is what he's talking about here. This is the tennis training, the specific tennis coordination coming into play, training the kid the way that the USTA would teach it. This is the game training him. For some reason, he was able to do that through these exercises, right? Through the mini tennis game with the correct ball. And that partially proves to me that this is how it works. This is how that's how it gets trained, through these exercises, not through a coach telling a person to do it. Okay, I'm gonna take just a short break, grab a quick drink of water. I'm going to move on to Chapter 2. That's why I would call this Chapter 2, Section 1.2. Stages of development and technique training. The teaching of technique must be divided into stages, each with different objectives. That requires a differentiation of the individual development objectives and thus the development contents. The whole technical development process is based on ongoing biochemical adaptation processes, physiological adaptation of the organism as a whole. These adaptation processes have their own laws, which must be acknowledged. This is why it is logical and necessary to set precise goals for the individual stages of development. A long-term systematic procedure in technique and performance development is a precondition for a player to reach higher performance levels and fulfill his individual maximal performance limit. Now, something I think he mentions here, physiological adaptation, biochemical adaptation processes of the organism, the child, the learner, as a whole. Now, I saw this phenomenon with my eyes. I'm going to tell you exactly what I mean by that. When you're working with children, any parent maybe have seen this. I saw this with my eyes. This is real. This idea of physiological adaptation. And this is another thing that people don't get. They don't have experience. They're not paying attention. You have an 8-year-old. They're on a red ball court. 8 years old. They can only learn so much. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter what you do. You are not going to see. You are that 8-year-old. You're not going to see that day the physiological adaptation occur. So let's say you have them playing red ball. You're playing situational games. You're doing speed exercises. You're doing coordination games, exercises, strength exercises, games. They're having fun. You're not going to see the adaptation that day. You're not going to see it tomorrow, and you're not going to see it next week. But that same 8-year-old continues the process you're putting them through that I just mentioned. Turns 9. Sometime after that 8-year-old turns 9, he comes in. You're doing the same thing or same group of things, different things, but the same process. And you're watching, and you're like, "What happened? You got better." And the kid's like, "I don't know. I just turned 9. My shoe size is bigger." That's the adaptation process for a child. When they grow, all that work that you did, it becomes crystallized almost. But he uses the word adapted. Becomes adapted by the organism. And this is one of the reasons why people don't get this, because you can't see it. You cannot see that. It's like you do the work, you go to bed, and while you're sleeping, all your body's doing the work. Your body's adapting, learning. The cells are changing. And you wake up the next day and you're a different person. You wake up the next week, you're a totally different person. You wake up the next year and you are a whole new player. That's what he means by this. And I saw this many times over with children. In accordance with D. Martin, 1991, the development path can be characterized as follows: establishing engrams of technical skills in a biomechanical optimum. In this step, we strive for an effective, efficient, and economical application of technical skills. The process is entitled Technique Acquisition Learning Training / Learning. Technique acquisition training is learning. Establishing engrams. Engrams, that's what we're talking about here. There's something called engrams. I'm not going to get into that. We can look that word up and what it means. We're going to get in more. He's going to get into more of what learning is. Because if the player or you or the child is not having success, then he or she is not learning. They are not learning through failure. This isn't the school of hard knocks. This isn't the street. Okay, they are not learning from failure. They may learn from failure when they become a player, but even that's debatable. But they're not learning from failure as a learner, as a tennis learner. B, stability, consistency. So go back. The developmental path can be characterized as follows: stability, consistency. The acquired technique, as well as the ability to use technical skills successfully, regardless of the changing external and internal conditions. This implies that a player must not only have learned to apply his technical skills under ideal conditions, but also be able to use his skills in difficult situations during a match. This is achieved in technique acquisition training, automatization stage. So, this is where we're looking at. Of course, you have the situation, like, can a player use their technique against all players? All these diverse different people. Can a player use their technique in social situations where there's people watching them? So it's not just about, I don't know if you really mentioned this, not really, but it's not just about, this is the social aspect. It's not just about, can they do it when their coach is there? It's just them and their coach. Can they do it with different players in different situations? Can they do it with other people watching? Can they do it in competitive environments, tournaments, games, gameplay around, a social event? Can they do it when it's windy, when it's sunny, etc., on different courts, different locations? There's no excuse not to be able to play in wind, in a windy condition. If your players are having trouble playing in the wind, it's a learning event. It's a learning event. The competition should not be stressed. I had that happen to me. With high school around where I'm at, the whole fucking season, it's windy and cold. It's miserable. And I was a learner. I was number one on my team learning, getting my ass kicked in the worst conditions possible. And I'm tough. I'm not a pushover. I'm not like the toughest person, but I'm not weak by any means. And it tore me down. C, virtuosity of technical mastery, complete control of technique. D, ability to use different kinds of skills in a variety of situations. In this final stage, the player must be able both to apply the right skill at the right time and to choose from a variety of strokes according to his tactical intentions. Virtuosity and variable adaptability are the focus of technique implementation training. So we have the developmental path can be characterized as follows. Establishing engrams, learning. Stability and consistency. Virtuosity, and the ability to use different kinds of skills in a variety of situations. Even the pros and the top from, you could even say the top 500 guys in the world, I would argue, are not through this process. There's people that won't ever go through this process completely because they don't want, you heard aggressive, they'll remain an aggressive baseliner. That's what they'll remain as. And they call, it's the all-court player, the aggressive baseliner. No, the aggressive baseliner has never got to see virtuosity of technical mastery. Just hasn't happened. They could be ranked 200 in the world. The sequence of stages shows us the different phases of the process. If the different stages deal with different objectives, they must logically have different contents, which requires a systematization of implementation training. Now, stroke is never just a function of the arms, but rather of the central and peripheral nervous system, more or less the whole skeletal muscle system of the body and different segments in a precisely established order. The information processing cognitive processes, the different types of and capacities of energy, and the cardiopulmonary and cardiorespiratory system. It's a function of the central and peripheral nervous systems. Starts here in the brain, right here, central nervous system, down through all the nerves and into your hand. Okay, that's how this works. You could read this paragraph over and over again. Just by how, the process of how complicated it is. What makes you think? So I ask myself, and I ask tennis coaches, what makes you think that you can do what you think you're doing? After everything I just explained. And the answer is you don't know what the fuck you're doing. You're throwing shit at the wall, and eventually it'll stick. Hopefully. That means that during the long-term development process, all these areas must be continuously worked on and incorporated as part of a harmonious whole. So he's saying that idea of a stroke never just a function of the arms, it's of the central nervous system. That means that it has to be holistic. The areas must be continuously worked on and incorporated as part of a harmonious whole. It's kind of like, could be, if you are going to separate it all, there's a little bit of a back and forth. Like I said, we're going to run, and now we're going to play tennis matches. We're going to do some speed exercises, and now we're going to play situational tennis games. trying to integrate that so that it's harmonious, that's happening together, so the brain don't get confused. Think about that when you're taking a lesson and you're getting technical, so-called technical instruction. Even if the coach was playing, I saw this too as myself. Even if you're playing the situations with the kid, right? And the kid's 12 years old and you're fucking 35. It's not the same as a 12-year-old playing a 12-year-old or a 12-year-old playing a 14-year-old. It's a grown adult playing with a child. If you've ever done this, it's not the same. You can't hit the same way because it's gonna be too hard for them. It's gonna change it's gonna not give them that consistency, stability that they need. You're asking them to move into a level they're not quite there. They're not there yet. The whole movement potential of a tennis player is determined by his individual conditioning and coordination abilities, and that is why these abilities must be continually integrated into tennis technique. How often do you see this? The conditioning and the coordination, specifically for movement, is lacking. So their movement potential, they might look good standing still, but they can't play on the move very well, or it breaks down. Maybe it's a kid who's plays a couple times a week. Maybe he's a serve and volleyer, and that's all he does as a learner. The existing movement potential coordination ability is converted into sporting performance by means of technique. That is a quote from HSASS 1995. So that is not from this book, that is a quote. There's a bibliography in here. I'm not seeing that book, but it's in German. The bibliography is in German. I think this is it. I don't know if I should look these books up. Some of them I looked them up. They're in English. Like he does have the tennis. What's it called? Here's listed as Tennis and Psyche. That mental tennis game by Galloway. This guy's written. There's more books in German, but they're not converted to. Like this guy Ferrauti. He's got a good book. We can also turn this quote around. Okay, here's the quote again. The existing movement potential, conditioning ability is converted into sporting performance by means of technique. We can also turn this quote around. Technique is transferred into sporting performance by existing movement potential, conditioning, and coordination abilities, thereby completing the circle. So here's what he has, a graph there. This is kind of showing it's going back and forth. The movement potential in tennis technique leads to sporting performance. Tennis technique with movement potential leads to sporting performance. So I guess it's kind of like saying you have someone who's a great mover and they have good conditioning, and then you work in the tennis technique through, we got to call it something else in tennis technique because that's going to throw people off. Tennis technique meaning, because it's throwing me off sometimes. It meaning the actual playing out the situations effectively. Like I can play cross court, and down the line, come to the net, play a volley. That's tennis technique. So I'm going to leave it there for now and see if there's anybody who actually actually watches this video, because stuff is it's tiring. It's about 40 minutes now with a couple people popping in. Nobody really sticking around. So we'll see if anyone actually uh, listens to this, and then maybe I'll continue with the next section, the systematization of technique training, where he gets into the first stage, learning, the thing I mentioned there. The first stage, coordination development. Then the second stage, short tennis. Third stage, mini tennis. And there's pages on this. It's not just listed. Fourth stage, formation of the final technique. This, he goes through the whole process. These stages that you go through. This is how you develop technique. I'm still paging through, explaining these 4 stages. Didn't even get to the 5th stage. So stay tuned for that. I hope we get some viewers here. I hope you enjoyed this if you do watch it. And again, as I mentioned before, I will send you the book. If you're able to donate, I appreciate it. If not, if you can't donate and you really want the book, let me know. I'll send it to you. So have a great night.